So welcome everyone virtually and physically to the BCS Oxfordshire Women in IT event at Oxford Brookes University. My name's Sam and I am your host for the evening, which means that if you need directions to either a fire exit or a toilet, please let me know and I will be happy to point. Other than that, I'm very grateful to have speakers Simon, Samia and Tereza in person, but also joining us online, Rachel and Vicky. And following the talks that we have for you this evening, the people who have joined us physically will be invited for a networking session immediately afterwards. So with all that said, I'd like to introduce Simon Jones, the branch chair for BCS Oxfordshire.
Well, hello everybody. I'm Simon Jones, as Sam's just said, and it's my pleasure to introduce the talk this evening. And I'm now going to try and work out how to make the slides move on. So I'm going to do three rather different things in the next few minutes. First of all, as it's our first meeting of the new season, term, academic year or whatever, I'm going to talk a little bit about the branch and what we do. I'm then going to talk through the programme that we have arranged for this season. And then I'm going to offer a few obviously unqualified thoughts about the Women in IT event and some of my experiences and some of my hobby horses, as it were, about the subject. So first of all, a little bit about the branch. We are one of almost 50 regional branches of the British Computer Society, which cover most of the British Isles, but not all. There are some gaps. The branch is run by volunteers, and we have support from the headquarters. For example, we're using the Zoom license today, which is supplied by headquarters. But the actual meetings and the meeting programme are all set up by the volunteer committee. We usually meet on the second Wednesday of each month from October through to June. We sometimes vary that slightly, particularly the December meeting, if that doesn't fit in with Christmas and so on. But it's usually the second Wednesday. We normally have in the past met at Rewley House in the centre of Oxford in the University of Oxford Department for Continuing Education. And we normally meet at 7:30 for a 1-hour meeting. This is a special meeting and we are indebted to Oxford Brookes University for being able to use this rather nice meeting room. And it is a longer meeting than we normally do. One of the unique features about the Oxfordshire branch is that we are very lucky that we can call on a range of high quality speakers who are Oxford or Oxfordshire based, and that's what we normally base our programme around. Other branches you might think sort of Hereford and Worcester might have a little bit more difficulty in doing that, but in Oxford we are very lucky to have world-class experts who can talk on almost any topic related to IT. And then we would welcome more volunteers. So if anyone is interested in joining the committee or helping us with our future programmes, then please speak to one of us after the meeting. Okay, so this is the programme that we have arranged for this year. It's chopped off the top on my screen, but we have today's event. And then next month, we will have a speaker from UKAEA on robotics in challenging environments. We have an annual Christmas lecture, which we tend to go for a very distinguished speaker. And this year, we're fortunate to have Conrad Wolfram, who is the European co-founder and CEO of Wolfram Research, which is an Oxfordshire-based company. And Sam is going to help me with the screen. Right, okay. So that's one of the examples of what we can attract in Oxfordshire. In January, we have a books-based meeting, which is going to be about AI for smart visitor management. Hint, this relates to Blenheim Palace, which should be very interesting. And then February, we have Daisy Shearer from the National Quantum Computing Centre will be talking and updating us on the world of quantum computing. And last time we had a talk on quantum, it was our best ever attended meeting. So look forward to that. March, we'll be back here in Brooks to explore the new facilities that are nearing completion at Headington Hill. And by March, they should be in full swing. In April, we will have another talk on quantum computing with a different focus. This one will be a focus on ethics and quantum. In May, we have another speaker from UKAEA on digital engineering. And then in June, we're planning a social event, which might be a standalone, or it might be combined with a visit to a local organisation. So that's our programme. Anyone can come to these. You don't have to be a member of the BCS, and look at our website at oxon.bcs.org to find more details and book your attendance. Okay, so now I'm just going to give you a few thoughts on women in IT. I'm doing this. I'm retired. I don't have any responsibility for making IT work in any organisation anymore, but I used to, and I had some fairly substantial management roles in the public and private sectors over the years, running large IT teams and organisations in different contexts. So I've got quite a lot of experience of trying to handle this issue. And the headline number is that only 23% of UK IT specialists are women. That's the 2022 figure. It was worse. It was 18% was the previous number that I used to work on. And that sort of 20%-ish is true in most countries around the world. There are one or two that have more, but in general, it's around 20% of IT specialists are women. And that really isn't good enough. We have to do something about it. There are lower figures for ethnic minority women, which obviously there shouldn't be. And the root of this goes back to school. There's a figure that says 94% of girls in the UK drop computer science at the first opportunity that they can drop it. And you have to go back and say why. And you have to think, well, what's it like in school at the age of 12 to 14 when that tends to happen? What does it feel like to be a girl in a class where computer science is dominated by boys trying to write computer games? And that's where it happens. That's where it drops. And it gets filtered out also later on. But there's a root problem there way back in school that those of us who worked in industry and in the public sector then have to deal with when it comes through to us. And it happens in universities as well. So these that 94% persists into gender biases in many organizations. Now, you could throw up your hands and say, I can't do anything about that. We'll just get the people working in education to sort that out for us and come back to us when it's fixed. But that's not the right approach. And we, anyone working in IT, can do something to help deal with that. So I've got a few actions that, based on my experience, there are a lot more things probably, but the few things here, few ideas and thoughts. So if you're working in IT, you can help by going back to the source of the problem and looking at ways to sell IT as a career to girls in schools, coding clubs and things like that. Volunteer help in schools to get girls interested in IT, which is a great career. We also need to think about how we take what I've called macho heroism, and I'm deliberately playing that up. You see it in the movies, you see it in people talking about IT, but the heroism that says you have to, in order to run an IT organization, you have to have staff who are prepared to pull an all-nighter to fix the problem that shouldn't have been created in the first place. But it gets fixed because people will work all night to do it. Now that's sort of got embedded into IT in a way that in companies, any change to any system has to be done outside working hours. And that then translates into people writing into job descriptions that we need, in order to do this job, you need to be prepared to work these hours, but at our beck and call, you will work outside normal working hours whenever we want you to. And that gets written into job descriptions. Now, when people see that, that puts off women with caring responsibilities. It puts off men with caring responsibilities as well, but it puts off women disproportionately more than men. But that goes back to IT practices. Why do you have to make all changes to IT systems outside normal working hours? What causes that? Why have you done that? Why is it necessary why can't you make that change actually during a working day, or take a short outage during a working day to update a system? Because you already have the new system running in a shadow mode, ready to just transfer over to it. And some of the best practices around testing and upgrade management and so on don't need that macho heroism to go with it. So one of the things that, if you're responsible for writing job descriptions and advertising posts, you can look at those and say, well, I've got the ticks that say we're an equal opportunities employer, but am I actually reflecting that in the wording that I'm using in the job description? Am I asking for things that I don't need for a particular job, that might put groups of people off applying for it? The next thing is looking at gender neutral recruitment practices. So now one of my tenets is that the point at which you're interviewing for a job is the wrong place to be trying to meet a quota on gender. That's not going to help anyone if you persist with that, because you will appoint people to jobs that they are not ready to do, and you will potentially make other types of recruitment mistakes. However, when you're recruiting for a job, and I've seen some of these things happen, one of the things you have to bear in mind is that there are statistics and studies that show that women will tend to, and it's a generalization, but statistically, women will tend to only apply for jobs that they feel that they are well qualified for. Men will tend to, not always, but statistically, apply for jobs that they know they're not ready for, but they like the look of the salary. So you can test that in a recruitment interview, but what you mustn't do, and a lot of people do, is say, well, she's the best person for the job, we'll appoint her. Actually, he was quite good, and you know, we could recruit. I know there's a vacancy going to come up anyway, so why don't we appoint him as well? Well, no, because you haven't given the women the fair chance to apply for that second job, even though that's an easy way out of a recruitment dilemma. And that does happen quite a lot, and it's a sort of unseen bias in recruitment practices. There's another one that comes along, which is that the corollary of this, that women will only apply for jobs that they're well qualified for, is that if you're working in an organization that has a fixed salary scale and you're pointing to that scale, men are much more likely to try and negotiate starting salary 2 or 3 points up the scale than women are. You have to be consistent about your practice on starting salary, as well as looking at as well, so that's where gender pay gaps start, because men start 2 points ahead of the women. Okay. So those are a couple of things that you can look at. There's mentoring and coaching. As I say, the recruitment room, the interview room, is the wrong place to be biasing towards women. However, you can, in your organization, look at ways which you can mentor and coach women so that they are ready to interview for the next step up. And a lot of organizations successfully do that in other fields. They can do it in IT as well. And then the last one that I've specifically brought out here is that, and it's been rather controversial in the BCS over the last year or so, because a meeting had to be cancelled because it was realised that the 4-speaker panel was all male. And there are, as I would personally, and I signed up to this when I was at work in a wider context, I will never speak on an all-male panel. If I've signed up to speak on a panel and I realise when I see the list of the speakers that there are no women on it, I will say, no, sorry, I'm not speaking at that event. And I think that's something that we have to do, and we have to be very vigilant that that's not happening. Now, there is another side to that, in that I therefore don't believe that you should have all women panels in meetings. And you don't solve that problem about the numbers of women in IT by excluding men from the debate about it. And I've sort of deliberately wanted to speak tonight to ensure that we weren't doing that here. Okay. There are lots of other things you can do, but those are just some of my thoughts. It's a crucial problem and a very important one that IT specifically has. I mean, I know there's engineering disciplines as well that have the same problem, but IT doesn't need to have this problem. It shouldn't have it. And therefore, we need to address it. And I'm looking forward very much this evening to hearing stories of successful women who have encountered it, got through it, looking at ways to deal with it in their careers, because I think by sharing those experiences, we and you can all learn important information about how to progress. So that's for me for this evening, and over to Sam, I think, who's going to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
So we now have one more in-person talk this evening before we then welcome our virtual guests as well. So we don't just have virtual attendees, we have virtual speakers this evening to give a real mix of things going on. So our second, our third in-person speaker tonight is Tereza Malacova. So Tereza has a BA in Philosophy, Politics and Economics from the University of Oxford and an MSc in Data Analytics from here at Oxford Brookes University, which became her first step in her transition from humanities to STEM. Following the completion of her master's degree, she began teaching at Oxford Brookes as an associate lecturer and has newly become a senior lecturer in computing. Tereza also has experience in one-on-one teaching, as she has supervised a number of EPQ students, supporting their first steps into the world of research. Her own research interests tend to combine computer science and the humanities, considering issues of ethics, economics, or politics within computing applications. Her research is currently focused on sentiment analysis of newspaper headlines of articles concerning Ukraine and analysing the resulting sentiments. She has previously explored racial biases in AI and hopes to continue engaging with issues of diversity and inclusion in the future. So it's my pleasure to welcome Tereza, and I will share your slides for you as well.
General things to say, but I also have slides for the dissertation if I end up needing them.
So did you want the slides up now?
Let's keep them up. I'll put them up to show. Yeah, it's just the share button. Yeah.
And then we need to hide some bits. And then how's that looking?
Right, so I'll see if I have time to talk about my dissertation and talk a little bit about the research I mentioned into sentiment analysis, Ukraine, and the news media. But I did want to speak firstly about my experience as a woman, because this event is Women in IT, and I wanted to touch up on that. I'd say that thinking back to where I kind of started, it's a journey that a lot of people don't take, sort of starting through humanities and then going into computer science as I have. But when I look back at my high school experience, it's not surprising to me that this is where I ended up, because I was, a pretty mathsy kid. I liked maths, I liked physics. I kind of liked the IT lessons we got, which at the time didn't really include coding. It was how to use Microsoft Word and that kind of stuff, but it was still very interesting. And overall, I wouldn't say that I ever experienced an overt, you can't do this because you're a girl, but it was always in the background. And I think there is that sort of societal pressure of girls don't do that. And no one quite says it out loud anymore, but that doesn't mean that it isn't there, because it's in our culture. If you think about that hacker or IT person image, you rarely imagine a girl. If you look at the movies, maybe you have someone like Lisbeth Salander, but she still fails within a certain stereotype, perhaps, of the punky boyish girl who perhaps acts more like a boy and therefore does stuff like hacking. And when you see that as a girl, it does discourage you. I'd say that when I was at high school and I was thinking about what I was going to do, again, no one told me you can't do physics, you can't do maths, you can't do computer science, but there was that kind of expectation that perhaps they weren't the girliest of subjects, and most other people at my school who were going into them were boys. In fact, pretty much everyone who went into STEM outside of medicine, and I guess in the end, outside of myself, from my high school class were boys, and the only girls that did STEM went into medicine. And we notice the groups around us, and we notice when we don't fit. And gender is one of the things that tends to be relatively clear when you look in a room and you can see, okay, this room is very male dominated, or this room is very female dominated. And I'd say as humans, we feel that, and we feel that sort of feeling of perhaps not belonging, even if it's not overt, of someone telling us you shouldn't be here. And I suppose for me, I was a weird kid, so I was used to not belonging, and so I wasn't quite as discouraged, but still, even through that, I feel like I was affected in a way. And it's interesting because when we look at a subject like information technologies, computer science, it's a subject that women actually used to dominate. If you think about the code for space programs, and you can look at a picture of a woman who wrote it, and there's a towering stack of papers. Women used to do that. Women used to be the people who engaged with computer science sort of in its inception. And then it gradually sort of changed, perhaps, as computer science became more a way of making money. It became more of a men's world. But what that shows us is that there's that fluidity, that it's not inherent that men should be doing computers and women should be doing something else. And it shows us that we can change it again. But I think that change is going to be not just a change of encouraging women overtly to say, come do computer science or come do any other subject that women don't tend to gravitate towards currently, but also changing the ways that we think as a society, and that sort of cultural feeling that we get, where a girl that is at school and is thinking about what am I going to do in the future doesn't feel like she is being pulled in a particular direction because of societal expectations, but feels like she can actually choose whatever she wants to, and it is going to be fully accepted and supported. Now, I have had some interesting role models, of course. I've spent a lot of my university life learning about humanities, but even there, it was quite inspiring to see that when we were learning about coding first in politics and then economics, it was largely taught by women. One of my favorite teachers was this Polish woman who taught econometrics, and she was amazing. And she was really the reason that I started thinking about going into a more sciencey subject, and ended up choosing data science as that step, because she was that role model for me of who I'd like to be one day, and she was teaching a very science heavy side of economics. And it really showed that it's good to have those role models. So we do need to try and push women into the subjects, not push them in the sense that they don't want to do it and we actually push them there, but show them that they can do it. And if they want to, then give them that nudge to say, yes, you can do it. Because the more role models as little girls we have, the more we're going to feel at ease going into the subjects ourselves. So I guess I'm going to conclude this part on, I think that the welcoming environment is one of the most important aspects of sort of fitting in with a group of people, which can be your university class, your subject course class, or just the class at high school when you're learning about computer science, when you're learning about maths. And we need to make it welcoming, and we need to make it not just welcoming in the sense that we're not excluding anyone, but that we really are working towards that inclusion. Right. That was some of the things I had on my mind that I wanted to say. I do have my second part, which is the research that I've worked on as part of my master's dissertation, and that I want to continue as I'm lecturing. But before I do that, I suppose, does anyone have any questions on the first bit? Cool. All right, let's have a look at sentiments and Ukraine and the UK media. So essentially, what I will walk you through is a little presentation on the research that I've done, why I've done it, what I found from it, and how I've done it as well. So where did it start? I had to do a master's thesis, so I had to figure out a topic. And at the time, Ukraine was a big topic in the news, and it was a topic close to my heart because I'm from the Czech Republic, I'm Slavic, and it was something that I cared about. And one of the things that I wanted to have a look at and I thought was interesting was how Ukraine as a whole was portrayed in the media. And because I live in the UK, particularly the British media. And so I decided to use one of the very interesting methods in machine learning and computer science, sentiment analysis, to have a look at media headlines and see if there have been any interesting changes in their reporting of Ukraine between 2010 and 2023. So seeing what has happened to the reporting there. In terms of the objectives that I actually had to go through, I had to find my headlines, analyze the sentiments, and then look at some further analysis, word frequencies, test differences between newspapers, see how they have changed over time. In terms of the rationale, one of the things that I was really thinking about, and something that came from my humanities background, was how the sentiments themselves and how the media coverage actually have an impact on a lot of different areas, where if you think about it, the way that something gets portrayed in the media can sort of covertly sway public opinion. And there's been quite a lot of research on that, showing that the general way that things get reported, whether negatively or positively, and the way that they get framed in the media. And that also speaks to something like, gender quotas, or whether computer science is the right pathway for girls, can and do sway public opinion, but they also sway the government. And there's a sort of way how these three things influence one another, where the media will then respond to public opinion because they don't want to be too unpopular either. The government will respond to the media and to the public opinion, who will in turn respond to the government. So it's probably a rather complex system that I didn't look into too deeply, but I did have a look at what the research said, and essentially said precisely this. In terms of foreign conflicts and foreign policy specifically, media coverage tended to be quite important in determining what the government was doing, as was public opinion, which kind of led to this being a relatively interesting and important issue to analyze because, well, the UK government does fund Ukraine, and has foreign policy regarding it. The other big question that I had to answer before I started was what I was going to use in terms of my data, because data is really important. If you have good data, you can get good results. But if you start from a point at which your data doesn't really make sense or isn't very trustworthy or accurate, then no matter what methods you use, the results are just not going to be all that great. Now, I will admit, choosing headlines was a choice that was easier in the sense that it meant I had to collect less data, which was good for me. But it did have a theoretical foundation, because a lot of people nowadays may only read the headlines of an article. In different pieces of research, that number was estimated between 60 and 80%. And that's quite a lot. And if you think yourself how many headlines you've seen and read in a week without reading the article, it is actually quite a lot, especially in the age of social media, where you will see the headline, but you'd have to click further to actually see the article. Lots of people will also just scan articles rather than properly read them. And that will affect the interpretation of the articles, as will the headlines themselves. An article read with a positive headline will impact our interpretation of it, as opposed to when we'd read it with a negative headline first. The next thing that I want to quickly go over before I have a look at the more technical methodology as well as the results is the timeline. Why did I pick 2010 as my starting point? The reason was that was the year when Viktor Yanukovych was elected as the president of Ukraine, and he was the guy that they protested all the way back in 2013 when he withdrew a deal that he was supposed to sign with the EU that would put Ukraine in close relation with the European Union, him fleeing to Russia and Russia annexing Crimea in the next year, causing the whole war in Donbass, and finally in 2022 invading Ukraine. And there's more political happenings beforehand, the Orange Revolution in the early to mid 2000s, but I didn't want to have such a large data set, and so I only focused it on the sort of immediate pre-Maidan events. Now, the media coverage of Ukraine was something that was really important to the whole situation, because it was really important in bringing attention to the issue. And especially in the UK, there is actually evidence that UK consumers were quite closely following the conflict. So again, the way that it was framed was quite important in how it would become viewed by people. Now, in terms of the methodology, let's get technical and let's actually get into computer science and leave the humanities behind. Now, the first thing that I had to do was pick which sentiment analysis method I was going to use, and there were actually quite a lot. Then pick my newspapers that I was going to study, gather my data, and analyze it. Now, in terms of sentiment analysis, if you're not familiar with it, it essentially analyzes your data. It's a natural language processing technique that looks at what kind of sentiment, positive, negative, or specific emotions the text is displaying. In terms of the method itself, you collect your data, you have to pre-process it, you have to extract your features and select the ones that you're going to use, and then feed it to whichever sentiment analysis technique you're going to be using. The main techniques are lexicon-based or machine learning, and also hybrid and some other types. Lexicon-based generally look at words and say, okay, this word is positive, this word is negative, and then calculate a measure for the sentence or the text that you're looking at. Machine learning looks at it more fluidly and sort of considers the text as a whole in one way, shape, or form, depending on the specific methods. Hybrid will usually use a mixture. I looked at accuracies for the analysis of newspaper headlines, and through the different methods, I found that the transformers models, which is similar to is the type of model that ChatGPT uses, actually had pretty much the best result, or second best to support vector machines and second best to bidirectional recurring neural networks, and tied with support vector machines. But the reason I ended up selecting the CBERT model was that it came the closest, and generally the paper on it explained the best how it was actually linked to human raters. Because when we think about sentiment analysis, we want to look at it from that human perspective, because if it tells us that the sentiment is positive, but we don't actually as humans think that it is positive, there's not really much use in it. And for the CBERT model, they tested the article headlines on human raters as well, and the agreement between them was only 80%, so the model with 75% was actually really quite good. The other reason was that they have actually used it on news headlines, so it very much fit with my intended purpose. If we look at the CBERT model, it comes from the BERT and then Roberta Large model, where BERT is one of the models that sort of ChatGPT arises from or is very, very close to. Roberta Large is then specifically used for analyzing text, and CBERT was built for sentiment analysis. Distill Roberta Base is another one which is essentially just like CBERT, where CBERT will give you positive and negative categories for your text, whereas Distill Roberta Base will give you 7 emotion sentiments. Now, when I was picking up my newspapers, I wanted to try and capture the spectrum of the left-wing, the right-wing, tabloids, broadsheets, but I also didn't want to have a lot of newspapers. So I wanted to kind of get the major ones. And I ended up picking the Daily Mail, the Guardian, the Times, and the Mirror because they were one of the most consumed newspapers that I could get the data from without needing a subscription. And they were also relatively trusted in their categories. Now, in terms of the scraping, that was interesting. Data scraping is one of the important parts of data science, and the whole process of gathering data and cleaning data tends to be underestimated, but takes up the majority of the analysis process, or the whole process that leads to the analysis. I used this cool tool that Sam actually recommended me back then, Selenium, which allowed me to get Lexis Plus, which is a repository that has articles and headlines from the UK, and then had to write lovely little code that was able to look at all the websites, because Lexis Plus wasn't really built for scraping, and essentially go and click, go to next page, get me headlines, all through the pages that were able to then get me over 70,000 article headlines. For the analysis, I used the models I mentioned, Seabird and Distill Roberta Base, and then analyzed work frequencies, ran proportion tests by the different newspapers, analyzed variance and correlation tests, and also look at time series for weekly, monthly sentiment proportions and number of articles, and finally visualized the results, which was the main outcome. So I ended up collecting the over 70,000 article headlines, with The Guardian and The Times as the broadsheets, having the larger numbers in the Mirror and Daily Mail as the sort of smaller tabloids on the lower end. And if we look at the number of articles, we can see the sort of clear spikes. The big one is obviously the start of the war, when a lot of articles were written. There's also some around 2014. So you can see here, The Guardian was essentially the most responsive when it came to writing about the initial 2014 situation. And it also has a lovely little spike here, which was when Trump was having that whole deal with Ukraine that he got impeached for, when he was trying to sort of threaten them into gathering some intel on Joe Biden's son in exchange for further support. And The Guardian wrote a lot about that. The other interesting spikes, I couldn't figure out at first, and I had to look at the data. It's the Euro tournament, the Euro football tournament, because Ukraine was a part of that, and I was gathering data on Ukraine as a whole. So that was a fun little interesting tidbit, that football impacts the number of articles a lot, and it ended up being in the other parts of the analysis as well, as generally the headlines got a lot more positive during football. In terms of the positive sentiment, the Mirror was overall, somewhat surprisingly, the most positive. You can see that the broadsheets are generally more on the 50% boundary for the 50% boundary, whereas the tabloids get a little larger spread of the positiveness, negativeness of their headlines. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. You've got the Distill Roberta Base, and you can see anger, disgust, fear, joy, neutral, sadness, and surprise as sentiments. Most of the headlines came out as neutral, except for The Guardian, which had quite a bit of fear around the sort of 2014 and onward. I'm not sure that that ended up being quite trustworthy, because one of the interesting results that I'd like to look into further was that when I compared the positive, negative sentiments to the 7 emotions, for the 3 newspapers, Daily Mail, The Mirror, and The Times, it was, as you'd expect, joy was overwhelmingly positive, anger, fear were more so negative. But for The Guardian, they were pretty much the same. And so it's something that I unfortunately didn't have time to look into in more depth. The positive theory is that it had something to do with the length of the headlines, because The Guardian ones were much longer, potentially confusing the model a little bit. And there was some significance in the headline length linked to the sentiments, but it was an interesting issue that I'd like to look into more in the future. In terms of the words, Ukraine, obviously, Russia, war, Putin, etc., showed up a lot. And by sentiment, it did essentially show the expected result, where Russia, Putin, Kremlin, etc., were more so appearing in the negative or negative-like headlines. And football was appearing a lot in the positive ones. But it wasn't something where we could say that we know that they were talked about negatively. We can just say from this analysis that they did appear there. I also looked at significances in terms of the differences between the proportions of articles that were in different newspapers, and they were quite significant in general. So I could say that the newspapers behaved relatively differently in the way that they reported, apart from these few insignificancies, like Daily Mail and The Guardian had insignificant differences in the proportions of anger in their newspaper headlines. To conclude, the broadsheets published quite a lot more articles than the tabloids, which does make sense because they tend to more so publish on politics, and they're just bigger than the tabloids. The rises in article numbers did correspond with Crimea and the Russian invasion, but also the Euro football tournaments, and The Guardian overall was the most responsive to politics in their article numbers. There was, however, no right-wing, left-wing or tabloid broadsheet divide in the newspapers, although the tabloids were generally a bit more emotive on the positive-negative scale. We could see that the Daily Mail was quite negative in their headlines, and the Mirror quite positive. And then the results generally followed the expectations, with sentiments following the political situation and getting sort of more heightened as the situation changed. And the negative sentiment headlines often featured Russia, Putin, Kremlin, and other related words. Thanks for your attention. Sorry for the slight overrunning.
We're okay.
Cool.
Okay, you kept pretty good time. So are there any questions from our in-person audience, the physical audience in the room? We will just see if stop sharing the screen now. Any questions for Tereza? And just while I'm setting this up for Rachel.
Yes, sorry.
What are your next steps with this project? Are you planning to build on that?
I am. I'm currently.
So the question was, what are the next steps for the project?
Right, yes, so I am planning to build on that. I am currently very, very busy with the first term of proper teaching, so it's on, it's there in the back of my mind. I want to update the data. I have already gotten the data collection, so I want to see if there's been any further changes. And I want to look a little bit more into the thing I mentioned with the kind of weird data coming from The Guardian. And see if there's anything else that I want to learn from it. But the primary focus will be to try and publish an article out of the dissertation, and then see if there's anything else that I can do to build on that research, and if I have the sort of capacity to do it. But it's definitely something that really interests me, and I feel like from the dissertation there are unanswered questions that I would love to answer.
Okay. And we'll just check the Q&A, which seems to have nothing at the moment. Okay, let's thank Tereza again, and yeah, really appreciate it coming. So we now have the first of our two virtual speakers joining us. So I'm going to pin this on Rachel. Rachel, can you hear me? And can we hear you?
1 second. Yep, I think you can. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
That's great. So
Fantastic.
Rachel Keene is a data inspiration group. Launched in July 2021 to empower students in secondary and tertiary education with data literacy skills and virtual work experience. With over 12 years in data recruitment, Rachel recognised the industry's challenges in building diverse and inclusive teams, as well as the knowledge gap among young people regarding data careers. Under her leadership, the group has grown to 16,000 student members, with education partnerships spanning 2,500 schools, 105 universities, and providing virtual work experience opportunities with leading UK brands like GSK, HSBC, NHS, and more, shaping the future of data talent across the UK. So I'm very pleased to welcome Rachel Keene this evening. Rachel.
Hi, good evening, Sam. Good evening, everyone. I feel like I don't have to say anything now. You've sort of, I feel like I could just sort of fill in the gaps before 2009 and I could go off. But thank you so much for such a great introduction and indeed for inviting me to chat this evening. I think one of the things I wanted to note really is that I'm not a typical women in IT or tech. But I have had many twists and turns in my story and learnings, and I always find talks like this very inspirational, and you get a lot of takeaways. So I'm hoping that there's some value that you all get from my chat and my story today, and hope that if you've got any questions, I'll be more than pleased to ask you. So I guess to start off, who is Rachel Keene? That's a $64 million question, really. Well, Rachel Keene's the youngest of 3 siblings. I'm the only girl. I come from a working class family where my mum was a housewife, and I guess the expectation of having a career probably wasn't at the forefront of everyone's expectations, certainly not for me. As a young child, I was incredibly creative. I dreamed of making stuff. That's all I really wanted to do. I didn't know what job I wanted to do. I just loved crocheting and knitting and sewing and embroidering. I loved, more importantly, being able to, the sense of achievement when I've made something, and I guess the sense of achievement of giving it to somebody and giving them something that made them smile, and something that they could enjoy. And at that time in my life, my greatest influence was my grandma Keene, who indeed was incredibly talented in this area. And I was thinking about this today when I was coming to putting this story together. And I thought, she used to say to me, Rachel, the back should always be as good as the front. And at sort of 12 years old, I just never got my head around that. And I guess since writing this story today, it's been quite prominent actually throughout my career. And I want you to remember that sentence. So I obviously went to school and did all my academics. I was never particularly academically bright. I was great at English, terrible at maths, and just never even really saw the point in that subject, which I know a lot of you will disagree with now. However, that will change significantly when you hear this story. I got to the end of my GCSEs. I'd made a couple of choices that I wanted to do going forward, completely extreme. One was English and History A-level. The other was fashion and textiles, obviously going back to the creative route. And I remember meeting up with my careers leader, who was the head of woodwork at the time. And I think I'd probably had a 5-minute conversation with him in 5 years. And it was probably the worst advice I'd ever got, I thought at the time. And he said to me, well, if you go and you do your A-levels, you've got to go and retake maths. I think I was like a grade D or something. So I was never going to be great at it. And I said to him, I'm not going to do it. I've spent 5 years doing all of this studying. I want to go away and I want to do what I want to do. So literally on the basis that he was going to make me do that, I decided entirely in that moment, that's it, my life's set for fashion and textiles, and off I went. Well, it was a great route for me to take. I absolutely loved college. I loved the course, and it then saw me go and choose my university of choice, which was Nottingham Trent University, 300 miles away from home, mid-90s, no mobile phones. You can imagine it was, set for a very, very good time in my life. But more so, the course was everything and more that I ever wanted to do. It was a 4-year course. It had a placement year in it, of which I managed to secure a placement with a company called Courtaulds, whose main supplier was M&S. And I was the first student, actually, not just the first girl, in 25 years to accompany Courtaulds to Hong Kong to present to M&S when I was 20 years old. And that was absolutely mind-blowing. Especially, we go back to the working class family, 20 years old in Hong Kong, 25 years, fantastic. And at that point, I decided what I really wanted to do is I wanted to pursue a career in buying. My dream job, my goal, I guess 2 or 3 or 4 lily pads later, was to go and work for Karen Millen. I thought, great clothes, beading, embroidery, I'm going to be in my absolute heyday here. That's exactly what I want to do. So I came back from the placement. I did my final year, came out of uni with a 2-1, incredibly pleased with that. Started making some applications to trainee buyer positions, primarily in London, some big department stores and other retailers. Got through the interview process, the telephone calls, the discussions with flying colours. But guess what? I failed the maths test. I failed the ratio test, hands down, completely failed. Who would have thought fashion and maths had anything to do with one another? Certainly not me. And in literally an instant like that, my heart shattered. What am I going to do now? Okay, I had that plan. I was going to rule the world. This was me. And then I guess, like we all do, we pull up our socks, we brush ourselves down and we say, right, okay, I'm going to have to refocus this now. And as many, I fell into a career. Mine was sales. I think I've probably sold everything known to man, coffee machines, marketing courses, recruitment, you name it, I've sold it. Ink cartridges, stationery, I've sold the lot. And I guess whilst that wasn't my dream job, on reflection, this was a period of my life where I probably developed the most important skill, which was the importance of building relationships, not just relationships, trusted relationships, and the importance of building a network, okay? Because throughout your career, these are the fallbacks, these are the people that you can learn from an expertise point of view, and actually from a safety net point of view as well. So 2009, we skipped to that. I joined a data analytics recruitment company where I was embarking on the next chapter of my life and learning about a new career vertical of data, but applying my previous skill set. Now, arguably 2009 wasn't a great time to join a recruitment company for obvious reasons, but what it did is it gave me the opportunity in sort of the first year, 18 months, to get established with some of the current clients, talk to them about what their businesses of the different departments did, what types of candidates they recruited in the good times, so I could get myself fully prepared. I then, from 2009 to 2015, I'd managed to establish myself in that business as a high billing consultant. I was earning great money, I had a great reputation, and again, I built on that network. So I thought, okay, this is great, but I needed something else. 2015 came and I co-founded the Women in Data Initiative, which I believe is the biggest event of its kind in the UK, now looking at sort of 70,000 community members plus. That was an incredible time of my life. Working on that initiative with the other co-founder, as well as working a recruitment job. Life was busy. I'm a single mum as well, so I was absolutely whistling and chewing gum. But let me tell you, it was incredible. We managed to achieve such great things in such a short amount of time. We started our life with an audience of 250 women at a university campus in a tent with rain dripping through one November, all the way through to the O2 and 2,500 women in front of us. And that in itself was such a development for me of belief, of different skills, of how I'd built these relationships. But now, how do I learn how to public speak? How do I build the confidence to do that? And that was really, really simple for me, because whilst those tasks were really difficult, actually, you know, it was just an absolute roller coaster that we just held on very tightly to, and saw us be invited to Downing Street twice for International Women's Day. What an honour. I had the pleasure of working with Rankin, the photographer, to create a short film to encourage young girls to consider data as a career, which we launched at the BBC. But I think by far my biggest achievement was securing a £250,000 outdoor advertising campaign for free for our 2019-20 Women in 20 in Data series, which essentially is a programme that recognises women who are very talented, successful, disruptors and inspirers in the data industry. Now, I go back to the beginning of my talk, because how did I negotiate that 250 grand deal for free? Well, as it happens, one of my clients who was recruiting, him and his partner were having a baby. So I decided that I'd make them a baby blanket. I'd crochet one. So that's exactly what I did. I gave it to him. He was very, very grateful, as was his partner, who I didn't know. But then it turned out 3 years later that she was my contact at Talent Outdoor. And she was the lady that helped me secure the funding to put on such an incredible outdoor campaign to support and showcase all these women, and to give the messaging of how important it is for young girls and women to believe in themselves and to follow a career of this nature. So I guess Grandma King might have been right. Okay, maybe always make the back as neat as the front. Certainly that helped me out there. So again, I move on. Again, we come to COVID. COVID for us all was a time to reflect. We certainly had a lot of time to do that. And for me, I wanted to really think about my next chapter. My daughter had just left school. She was starting A-levels herself. She was heading towards sort of 18. And I felt, you know what, this is a time for investing in me now. You know, I want to take my money, my time, my expertise, and I'm going to take a big lump of courage. And I want to hand my notice in of the job that I'd been in for 12 years that was well paid, and I want to do something for myself. And that's exactly what I did. So in January 2021, I handed my notice in, and I launched the Data Inspiration Group in July 2021, which, as Sam alluded to, is something I'm incredibly proud of. I've been working with the business for 3.5 years now. And essentially, it's a virtual work experience offering for young people across secondary and tertiary education to gain virtual work experience with leading employers, but more importantly, to actually develop key employability skills. So we're talking about things like problem solving, data literacy, storytelling, presentation, things that I'd seen firsthand in recruitment, that when you know, I was placing young grads that didn't have this kind of exposure, that felt, you know, very overwhelmed when it came to doing a data task as part of an interview presentation or proposition. And I wanted to start the journey earlier. And I think for me, not only was it about encouraging young people to consider a career in data, but more importantly and more widely, it was about upskilling and future-proofing young people for any career that they wanted to be a part of. Because as we all know, data is at the heart of everything we do, and it's making decisions for us every single day in every industry. So one of my kind of MOs, I guess, is that I'm going back to the kind of hating of maths, the failing of the ratio test. Is I actually thought to myself, perhaps if I'd been taught slightly differently about ratios in a real world setting, and maybe almost mask the math side of it, maybe I would have learned, you know, in a different way. So for me, when we're working with our partners, we create innovative and engaging career challenges, which are bite-sized projects for our 3 student cohorts to undertake. So our cohorts are first step, years 7 to 9, next step, years 10 to 13, and step up university and higher education students, which can include postgrads, recently graduated in career changes as well in that cohort. But we come up with problem statements, certainly for the younger cohorts. We try and disguise a little bit about the kind of data aspect, because we want to attract students from every single walk of life, okay? Because we know that we need to build diverse future talent pipelines in order, you know, to have teams out there that are representative of customers of today. So I'll give you a couple of examples now. I love this. This is my favorite part. So we're working with National Highways. We're going to be launching with them in a couple of weeks' time, and they've got some career challenges that are live online at the end of November. And their first step career challenge is, how did the hedgehog cross the road? Now, there is not a smack of data or maths there, but actually what's great is that these young people will be working out how data can inform a decision on where the next wildlife green bridge goes. Okay, so we know that young people will be interested in that rather than roads. Okay, where for our next step cohort, it's about where there's Wi-Fi, there's a way. How motorways will eventually have Wi-Fi on it. We know as a teenager, every young kid wants Wi-Fi and is glued to their phone, or wants to download films, etc., or watch films on long journeys. So we try to create challenges that are engaging for all. Now, As Sam mentioned, we're incredibly proud of the network that we've provided. There's 16,000 students, that's growing every single day. We've got 2,500 schools we work with, 105 unis, some international as well, which we'll be working on shortly. We've created classroom resources for Key Stage 3 and 4. We go on site into schools and encourage team working for entire year groups to solve problems together. And all of our resources award our young people with certificates, which are incredibly valuable for the younger years to make option choices, for the cohort of years 10 to 13 to start thinking about next steps, apprenticeships, university choices, UCAS applications, etc. And essentially for our step up cohort to really give them that extra value to the CV, LinkedIn profiles, employment choices, and to give them a positive subject to talk about interview. I mean, one of the things I think from a recruitment perspective is, you know, it's very difficult. It's very easy to work out what you don't want to do. It's very difficult to decide what you do. So I'm sure you can hear in my voice, I absolutely love going to work every single day. It's something that I absolutely adore, but I have to let you into a little bit of a secret. And that secret is tech actually terrifies the life out of me, which everybody thinks is hilarious. But one thing I can say is that if you can find something that you're passionate about, that you love and that you enjoy, you know, when you've got something, this fear, this little dark shadow in the background, you will have the courage to be able to face it and stare it straight in the eyes. And for me, that's technology. And I do pat myself on the back only every now and again of some of the things that I manage to get over. And again, I go back to the importance and significance of a really supportive network, because if you build a network full of experts across lots of different disciplines, you will never be alone. And that's really, really important, I think. So I wanted to say a couple of last mentions, actually. The first thing is, you know, I'm going to plug this now. We've got some live online career challenges next week with Meta. Sam, if you may, if you could put it in, thank you very much. So Sam's just included in the chat there the link to our website, but also the link to our Meta events that are running Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday evening. Thursday for university students, Tuesday and Wednesday for secondary and tertiary. So please do register and come along if that's going to be of interest to you, if you're looking to get some virtual work experience, or indeed just want to understand a little bit more about our programme. But a colleague of mine or a friend of mine that you'll be meeting shortly, actually, we had a chat today and we were talking about superpowers. And I said, I don't know if I've got a superpower really. And about 10 minutes before I came on, I thought, actually, I do. And I think it's quite important that we all have a superpower. And mine's belief. Mine's the belief in that life throws you curveballs, okay? And those curveballs you have to see as opportunity, because when you see opportunity, it gives you an opportunity to develop. And when it gives you an opportunity to develop, it gives you an opportunity to achieve. And I think if you can consider every skill that you have, irrespective of whether it's in work, out of work, in academia, outside of academia, all of those things, when you bundle them together, are your superpower. And on that note, I hope you found value from my chat tonight, and I'd love to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
So any questions for Rachel from the physical audience? I will share the links on screen after we end the webinar. So any of the links I've been sharing in chat for the virtual audience, I will put up at the end also.
Sam, can I just say also, if you could put my email into that chat as well, if anybody wants to carry on a conversation, you know, or has any questions that perhaps they think of later and not this evening. I'm conscious that you need to move forward with time. You know, I'm more than happy to answer any questions over email as well, should they come through.
I'll share Rachel's email in chat in a moment, and again I'll put it up at the end of the physical session for any of our in-person attendees too. Lisa, did you have a question? Go. Yeah, I'll say it for her. Okay. Okay, so the first question, Rachel, was during your interesting career journey, what is something that you wish you had known earlier? I'll ask that one first.
What do I wish I'd known earlier? What do I wish I'd known earlier? That I never give up. That's what I wished that I'd known earlier. If I could look at my younger self now when she's got her head in her hands and wondering what she's going to do next, I would go, you're never going to give up, and you're never going to give up because you're going to power through. And that's something that comes from inside, because actually you can't, right? And whilst things seem really tough at lots of different times, and being a single mum, that was probably my toughest time, trying to juggle everything else, I refused to give up. Yeah, that would be my advice to you.
And then the second question was, what is your biggest regret? What is your biggest regret?
Whatever. Christ.
I paraphrased too much yet there.
Let's not go down that. What's my biggest regret? That I didn't leave my last full-time job earlier. Because actually I didn't have the courage to do it. I didn't believe in myself at that point, and I felt that I feel like now I'm doing this, I should have had the courage to do it. And actually sometimes when you put things off, you find yourself losing a part of yourself. So when you're ready to go, face the fear and do it anyway. Don't, oh, because the thing is, there's not a thing. The reason you feel like you do is because you need to move. That would be my only regret.
And finally, actually back on more focused on the theme of women in IT, have you noticed a gender disparity in your work, looking at cohorts at the population engaged with the data activities?
Yes, of course. I mean, we know there's a disparity, right? I mean, I was the co-founder of Women in Data. We know that there's a disparity in industry, let alone, in education. However, I think one of the things that's super interesting when we go to deliver on-site data days at schools is, I alluded to earlier that essentially we deliver these to like year groups of students. Most of the time they choose which teams they want to be in. And a lot of the times it's the girls that go, I don't know what I'm doing, miss. I don't know what I'm doing. What's this? What's this? And 9 times out of 10, when we finish the day, which involves some data literacy activities, creating a presentation with their findings, and then presenting the work to a Dig Data volunteer, 9 times out of 10, it's the girls that win. So actually, that then builds confidence in some of those decisions. I think if I could get into every school in the country, if I could clone myself 2,000 times, I feel confident that I can win this war. But it's slowly capture monkey. And I think one of the reasons we create the career challenges and the topics that we do is so that actually they are not kind of focused on boys or girls. They're focused on a sort of general subject.
Brilliant. Rachel, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure the audience will want to thank you again if you can hear them on the mic. And if you're there, we'll start you up in a second.
Thank you very much for your time. Have a good evening, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so our final speaker tonight is Vicky Pike. With extensive experience across the private, public and third sectors, Vicky is a 20 Women in Data awardee, a senior coach practitioner with ILM Level 7 and a computer science graduate. Vicky has spearheaded numerous initiatives that significantly improve gender diversity and inclusion within tech teams. Following a successful tenure as a senior leader at Sainsbury's, she founded Idera to help organisations get the most from their people, teams and technology. So Vicky, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Hopefully you can hear me, and thank you for a lovely intro and inviting me. Hello, everyone in the room. sorry I can't be there in person. Rachel, what an inspirational story. I loved hearing it, and it resonated with me on a number of levels, which perhaps you'll all hear in my talk. So I'm Vicky, I'm a woman in tech, a 30-year career, as Sam said, and unlike Samia, I have come from a family of boys. So I have a husband, 3 sons, 2 brothers, and an extended family that outnumbers women 2 to 1. So in more ways than one, I know what it's like to be the only woman in the room. Now, before I start, I just want to share a secret about me. I have always wanted to be a pop star, okay? Perform on the big stages, sing my heart out, but more than anything, reinvent myself every couple of years. And look, I know being a pop star isn't a realistic goal. I really actually can't sing, but I do love change and reinvention. And that's the theme of my talk tonight. So let me share a bit of background first. I was born into a liberal middle-class family. I attended a terrible state school in Milton Keynes. It was the sort of place where most of the children just didn't achieve. I didn't achieve. I was really unhappy. I was bullied. I suffered from health issues, and I dropped out age 16 with just 1 O-level. But not to be held back by this, I started what I thought was going to be a glorious career working with horses. But after I began, it was clear it wasn't like the books. It was long, hard, grueling days working for grumpy, unkind people and virtually no money. I loved the horses, but 4 months in, I left. No qualifications to speak of, no direction, no intentions. It's fair to say I was a bit lost. So this was the summer of 1986. My brother was back from uni. He scooped me up and helped me find a college course that accepted people with no qualifications. Now, the syllabus didn't exactly excite me, but I know that it opened a door. I knew there was opportunity somewhere there, so I enrolled. And get this, day one, a teacher comes in and asks if anyone has 2 O-levels or more. And I think, well, I've got 1. and there is my CSE grade 1 in horse mastership. For those of a certain age will know that that counts as an O-level. So my hand shoots up and I say, yes, I've got 2. And I was asked, did I want to join the computer studies BTEC course? And frankly, I had no idea if I wanted to. I had never touched a computer, but I was flattered. I was flattered to be asked onto a BTEC course, and it had to be better than the course I was on, which had a whole module on how to answer the telephone, which I thought I could do okay. But anyway, I sat a logical reasoning test and was accepted onto the course. So computing is something I would never have chosen or identified as something I wanted to do, never. I mean, what 16-year-old really knows what they want to do, but computing was particularly inaccessible to me, a girl, and at that time appealed to a certain sort of person, 90% of whom were men. But that, I mean, the kind of men aspect didn't bother me. I was used to being surrounded by men, and on this course, I found something that I loved and that what I was good at. It was a surprise, actually, and for the first time in my life, I started to enjoy learning. And that learning was a perfect fit for computing, and what I mean by this is problem solving. I loved problem solving. I still love it. And I think how lucky I was to fall into computing this way, through this, this luck that I had, and how unlucky that so many girls and women didn't, because it was too inaccessible. So anyway, it started a lifelong love of problem solving, one which would certainly endure regardless of my next career reinvention. I completed the course. I went on to go to university and graduate with a computer science degree. And my mum was forever retelling the story of the girl who dropped out of school with 1 O-level only to pick herself up and graduate with a degree. So after graduating, I joined a startup. Well, they weren't called startups then. I joined a small company founded by 3 men, and I was employee number 3 and the only woman. I continued to be the only technical woman during its 3-year expansion to 40 people. I don't remember thinking I'm the only woman in the room, but I was most days. I don't really know what the impact of this was then or even now. I don't remember it being a thing back then. And I suppose that's part of the problem, isn't it? This kind of blind complicity. And the reason why events like these tonight are so important to raise awareness in a number of ways. And of course, you know, I don't remember anything overt or untoward, but I do wonder, however, how much of that sort of likability line I had to toe, and whether I changed fundamentally as a result. I don't know. But what I do know is I loved it. I was learning every day and I was terribly impatient to be better. I wanted to be like that senior consultant, and that's what I aimed for. I remember being sent on a data warehousing course only to be sent out on client site 2 weeks later, designing and building my first warehouse, being introduced to the client by my boss as the expert. I was being who I wanted to be. I was being that senior consultant in this respect and extending the boundary of limitations of who I was and well, feeling that fear and doing it anyway, right? So by the late 90s, I'd met my husband, and then at the height of my career, we started a family. By 2003, I gave it up, my career that is, to look after my family for 10 years. I learned and did many things during this time. I ran businesses, I volunteered, and these skills absolutely shaped the person I became and totally set me up for future leadership. But these skills were discounted again and again and again when in 2013 I set about rekindling my career. I eventually secured a role though. I had to take 2 steps back. The word junior in my job title, junior architect, didn't resonate with me very well, but ho-hum. I actually dropped that title from my email signature, deciding to own and set the expectation of my capability rather than have someone else set it for me, right? And this attitude to focus on who I wanted to be helped convince others of my aptitude and potential. Now, look, I'm not recommending that everyone goes out and changes their email signatures, but by shaping what it is you want to be rather than what you are is the best way, in my experience, to become it. So be and act what you want to be. In 2018, my sister, who had Down syndrome, sadly died of cancer. I had coincidentally been approached by MenCap, the largest charity for people with a learning disability, at around the same time, and it was a total calling. So I joined MenCap as a data architect and saw quickly the need they had for a head of data, someone who could convince the exec and the trustees to invest the funding needed to make a difference. So I redrew my boundary again. I decided the person I wanted to be, so I expanded the breadth of my role. Indeed, the title data architect did get in my way. I remember really clearly the conversation I had with the CFO explaining how my influence was limited by my title and confusing my stakeholders. And this paved the way to becoming the head of data. I saw the role, I acted in the role, I applied for the role, I secured the role. And honestly, if you've been doing the role, you are in a great position to secure it at interview. And so I was reinventing who I was and being who I wanted to be. After 18 months at MenCap, I had developed, landed, and started executing on a data strategy and was no longer honouring my love of learning, solving problems I spoke about earlier. So in 2020, I looked at who I wanted to be next and decided to reinvent myself into a product manager. I redefined my boundaries again and returned to Sainsbury's, where I led various product teams from data to contact centre to checkouts. And in the last 4 years, whilst being at Sainsbury's, I have become much more cognizant of diversity in tech. Certainly when, you know, I compare when I was working in that first role in the small consultancy. So I was very active in Sainsbury's, advocating for diversity and women in tech. I became much more aware of inequality in general across the tech industry. So whether that's flexible working policies that actually aim to support women and men actually end up reducing opportunities or advancement, or microaggressions in the workplace where women are significantly more likely to be recipients. So twice as likely to be interrupted, as an example. And it comes about from that millennia of societal bias. And then there's closed shop mentoring or unconscious bias in its other forms, which Simon talked on earlier. So I am passionate about levelling the playing field. I'm passionate about women having the opportunity, but not only that, I see the bias playing out more widely in tech. In the tech we use. So I am ultimately passionate about creating a world where technology serves the needs of all. And of course, this can only be done through diversity. And I believe wholly in the power of self-discovery, which is why I trained and qualified to become an executive coach. Now, Simon talked about coaching and the power of it earlier. And following this qualification, I looked for ways to utilize it meaningfully in my day job. When I was at Sainsbury's, and I started with the broken rung. And for those of you who don't know what the broken rung is, it's a phrase that was coined by McKinsey and Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In organization. It's based on a decade's worth of data, and it's where a disproportionate number of men are promoted to the first rung of management compared to women. So for every 100 men promoted, just 87 women are, and it impacts the ladder all the way up. So I designed a group coaching program for female engineers who have been identified as high performing, high potential, but had become stuck in their role beneath the broken rung. And some for as long as 5 years. They were nominated for the program by their line managers, but it was really plain to see that these women did not personally connect with their performance or potential. And the coaching opened their eyes to it, helping them to understand how their confidence and emotions manifest, motivating them to galvanize behind a goal, creating peer support and accountability. And 50% of the people who were on that coaching program were promoted during the course. They had the courage to apply and was successful in doing so. So I was so heartened to hear feedback like I would never have had the confidence to apply for that role if it hadn't have been for the coaching. And I too had an aha moment, which led me to my biggest reinvention. So I literally have re-architected a new me. I mean, it really is a big change. A new me who is a business owner, a me who can deliver large-scale, meaningful and impactful change into organisations. A me who is working with deep purpose, aligned with the things that I care most about. A me who has tapped into more belief than at any time in her life I've needed to. I left my job. And dare I say, a me who can change the world, who wants to at least change the world. So in July, I left my corporate role in Sainsbury's to create my business Idea. And Idea aims to cultivate diversity, supporting change and equitable representation all the way up the pipeline. This mission is coupled with my love and faith in coaching. I know that it works. I've seen that it works to help organizations attract, crucially retain, and then of course advance diverse talent and to deliver them performance, and while also fostering an inclusive work culture, tackling the bias that Simon talked about earlier. So I'm thrilled in the short amount of time that I've been doing this, like literally 4 months, to have so many active conversations with multiple organisations interested in my services. And I founded Idea on 4 values, 4 things that are important to me. So connecting through many perspectives, of course, because diversity is at the heart here, right? Making an impact to be of value and valued, courageous spirit, well, for me to leave a role, take a risk, do something different, and excellence driven. And this is my personal fingerprint. And that fingerprint has left its indelible mark on my company, Idera. So I ask you, what's your personal fingerprint? What do you hold dear and how are you honouring it? How are you defining what you want to be rather than having it defined for you? How are you reinventing yourself? How can you move the goalposts and score the goal? Thank you so much for listening. If we have time for questions, I am more than happy to take them.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. So, Vicky, I think you wanted me to share a link, which I've lost. Was it right at the top of the chat? Oh, it's idera.com.
I'll pop it in. Yeah, I'll just pop my website in for people who want to read some more.
So, do we have any questions from the physical audience for Vicky? Been coming. Okay, I'll just check with the Q&A. Don't worry, I have checked. So the networking immediately afterwards for anyone who still has the energy, that the Union Bar is open till 10. So please don't worry, we will be able to go over and get a tea or coffee or something else there. Sorry, Vicky, I can't send anything to you afterwards, but we'll be thinking of you. There's nothing coming from the audience at the moment. So I've shared your website now, Idera. I suppose I'll field one question myself to you just to finish off. Obviously, you've started this new venture in the last 4 months, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity to speak to you again or invite you to some other event either at Brooks or with Women in IT. But where will we hopefully see you in 16 months from start, in 12 months from now? Where are you projecting to be?
Thank you, Sam, for that question. I'm going to think big. I think, I said in my talk, I want to change the world, and I really do. And to change the world, you have to be ambitious and think big. So I want to be working with associates and rolling out programs into organizations that are doing 3 things. So the coaching specifically is really effective for that sort of one-to-one leadership coaching, but also team coaching too. So it can really foster a new way of looking at what diversity is. So I want to be in a number of universities, why not universities, organizations doing that. But also on the flip side of that, the coaching that was so successful to support diverse talent, I want to be delivering that to cohorts of female engineers, addressing that broken rung, building that network is where I hope to be in 12 months' time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you once again, Vicky, sorry. Right. We are very nearly at the end of the evening. But before we go, I'd just like to share a slide briefly to say thank you to all of our speakers this evening. That's Simon, Samia, Tereza, Rachel, and Vicky. So thank you very much once again. Some of us haven't got a chat to hand because we're here in person. So there are a number of links. And again, we can share them after the event as well. But just immediately here, this is to Brooks Enterprise for Samir. So if any of you want more information on the Brooks Enterprise stuff, we have the link there. These are the links from Rachel with her email address. And I'll leave that for 1 second, just so people have the opportunity to grab it. And then finally, from Vicky, the website idera.co.uk. So with that, I will thank our virtual participants for joining us today. And yeah, goodbye from Oxford Brookes.